What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of today's very interesting discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sit Down video. If you're checking us out currently on iTunes or Spotify, welcome in. This is episode 169 of the Sit Down. And recently, I was taking a look on YouTube at something I've always been fascinated by, large markets of sorts. And I stumbled across a show called The World's Greatest Food Markets. And essentially, it was about this guy, Roger Barton, who works in England. And what he did is he went into the Fulton Fish Market up in the Bronx, and he attempted to turn a profit selling fish. And I've always been fascinated by food markets, right? They're gigantic, right? Whether it's Hunts Point up in the Bronx, the original Fulton Fish Market down in Lower Manhattan. And it got me thinking, the Fulton Fish Market, what a fascinating place. So I decided to delve into the history of the Fulton Fish Market. And what I'll do is I urge anybody, if you're looking for a cool documentary, this came out about 10 years ago. I'll include the link to this video on YouTube in the description. This guy would ultimately go on and go to like Mexico and different places and try to, assert himself into the market, right? So check it out. It's pretty cool. But I want to talk about the Fulton Fish Market, which I find to be a fascinating place. And what I learned quickly is really since its inception, well, not necessarily its inception, but over the last 100 years, the Fulton Fish Market was controlled by the Mafia, and every piece of fish that went through hundreds of millions of pounds, $1 billion business, has been controlled by the Mafia. And guess what? When it was closed in 2005, when it went up to the Bronx at Hunts Point, it was also controlled by the Mafia too. Let's delve in to the Fulton Fish Market and its history. Now, the Fulton Fish Market originally opened way back in 1822, and it's considered the most important East Coast fish market in the United States. And back then, in the 1800s, large vessels would pull right in to it and, would kind of unload, and fisheries would, push food out to people. And it was a place where people could sell fish and move merchandise and all sorts of things. And it delved into becoming this large market down on the lower end of Manhattan, really close to the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, this is a photo of the Fulton Fish Market in the 30s. It would eventually become the oldest market located near the Brooklyn Bridge along the East River in Lower Manhattan. Now, over its course of nearly a 200-year history, there have been 4 fires, one of which we'll talk about. And they've handled millions of dollars in fish on a daily basis. Now, it's said that the Fulton Fish Market, really up until its closure in essentially the late 90s, early 2000s, I mean, you're talking about $1 billion business, right? Every year, hundreds of millions of dollars. And as far as seafood, I mean, I believe it's only second in comparison to like Tokyo as far as kind of what it is. So this is a market that was incredibly profitable. And what the Mafia did is in the 20s, they established and asserted their dominance over the Fulton Fish Market. Now, the first person that we know of that was involved with the Fulton Fish Market was a young 20-something, a guy called Joseph Sox Lanza. Now, Lanza was born in the early 1900s and will come over to America from Palermo. He was connected to the Mafia gang, which was the kind of the early Lucchese crime family, many, many, many years ago, almost 100 years ago. He would control a union, which he would found called Local 359, which was the United Seafood Workers Union. Now, he would get a job on the docks, becoming an organizer, and ultimately controlled everything. Now, he had a brother called Nunzio who would eventually take over. And he would be hit with racketeering, Joe Lanza, in the 1930s. In 1938, he would go to prison and die in 1968. He was a reputed member, very close to Charles Lucky Luciano. This is a guy who helped, alongside Lucky and helped America in the late 30s, early 40s with World War II, that sort of thing. Now, eventually, the Fulton Fish Market would fall under the control of Joe Lanza's brother, a person called Harry Sox Lanza. Now, he would be making tens of millions of dollars a year and was involved till the mid-70s when he then retired. At that point, a person under him called Carmine Russo, who was an associate of Mr. Lanza, would take over. And all of these people were either members or associates of the Genovese crime family. And when you talk about the Fulton Fish Market, one of the names you're always going to hear is this guy, Carmine Romano. Now, Romano was born in 1935. He and his twin brother, Peter Romano, are probably your most well-known people that were involved in the Fulton Fish Market. And let me tell you something. These guys made millions of dollars. They controlled every piece of fish that went through. And what they did is asserted control through the union, Local 359. They skimmed whatever they wanted. They extorted people. And I'm going to go into some of the things they were doing inside the Fulton Fish Market. And no one from the city cared about this for like 60, 70 years. So you'd go down there, you may have a wholesale company, you got to pay these guys to do everything. And every person that went into the market, whether it was truckers, whether it was, the guy that sweeped up at night, everybody had to pay in. And they had control just like any other mob family did, whether it was the Teamsters or they controlled everything. And this is the Mafia. This is when the Mafia ruled everything. And Carmine Romano learned from, his uncle, Carmine Russo. He learned from watching guys in the 40s and 50s. This guy had been around the fish market his entire life. Now, it was said that Carmine Romano was 6'2", 350 pounds, and he was the brains of the organization. And his brother, Peter, was more or less the muscle. And these guys had people under him. They were both made members of the Genovese crime family, and they were allowed to operate. And as long as they kicked up, they controlled everything. And this is what the Genovese crime family was known for. They controlled fish. They controlled the San Gennaro feast. They controlled concrete. They controlled every facet of life. And this is, to me, what makes the Mafia so interesting. I was watching Gomorrah the other day, and I'm watching season 3, and I noticed that just like the mob here, the Gomorrah controls every facet of life. You need a job, you go through them. They control all the businesses, right? It's amazing. And then you look at where the Mafia is today, it's such a joke because what a powerful group this was, right? In the 70s, the 80s. And guys like Romano became very rich people over the years. Now, Romano was the treasurer and essentially controlled about 800 people in Local 359. He skimmed tens of millions of dollars. And this is in the 70s. Now, the Fulton Fish Market in the 70s was generating about 200 million pounds of fish per year. And what he did is he not only controlled the market, he controlled companies up to like New Bedford, which is in Massachusetts. It's a port, if you will. He had all sorts of trucking and shipping channels. And what he would do is if he would get indicted, he would just pass control of the market to his brother. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Romano and what he would do. In 1975, Carmine Romano would start a business called the Fulton Patrol Services. Get a load of this thing. Now, the Fulton Patrol Services' goal was to, quote, reduce theft. And what they would do is theft was so rampant, out-of-town truckers were hauling fish to the Fulton market, simply started paying a tax. You could loan shark, you could bookmake, everybody flourished. Businesses would pay tribute to the Genovese crime family each Friday, which was called Leeching Day. The mobsters called it. Informants were beaten into silence or in some cases whacked. Now, this Fulton Protection Service obtained cash payments through the use of fear and other means from businesses in the fish market. Now, in the indictment that would eventually charge Romano and his brothers, this company, you essentially had to pay $1,200 a week And let's just say there are, I don't know, 100 vendors. I mean, that's a bunch of fucking money, man. Not only did they control the dock workers, they controlled loan sharking, they controlled gambling. They would also do things like, obtain payments through, like if you've ever seen Sopranos, right? When the mob's no longer powerful because they don't control this kind of thing anymore, right? You can't go into Starbucks and extort Starbucks. But back then, you're dealing with mom and pop businesses. You could do things like this. Now, the indictment would say that at one point they collected nearly $650,000, and it added that the company performed no legitimate service. It was just paying into the coffers of the Lucchese Crime Family. Now, they were also accused of collecting $300 payments each December from many businessmen in the fish market on the Lower East Side, and that was looked at as some sort of Christmas tribute payment. These guys were making a lot of money. They were taking that money and investing it into legit business. Now, eventually, in 1978, Romano's Social Club on Front Street, not far from the market, was raided. The feds would find stolen guns, drugs, stolen gems, gambling cheats, and eventually Romano would pass control of the market to his brother. He would eventually, in 1982, Carmine Romano, be convicted of racketeering and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. He and both his brothers were banned for life from the Fulton Fish Market. Now, in the late 80s, when the federal prison system still had parole, Mr. Romano would be released in 1989. He would eventually move to New Bedford, Massachusetts, which I talked about before, and lived in a very nice home. This is his home in New Bedford, Mass. 5,700 square feet, nice pool in the back. Mr. Romano did pretty damn good in his life. Carmine Romano would die in 2011 and built a fucking fortune down on the market. Now, what he would also do is groom many of the people underneath him. People like Rosario Ganji, who in that original 1981 indictment, Rosario Ganji was mentioned. And he was mentioned, on a small level. He was just a soldier at that point, but Ganji learned from people above him, like Carmine Romano. Now, once Rudy Giuliani took over in the 90s and became mayor, he would launch a campaign, as we know, against the Mafia. He hated the Mafia his entire life. We know he was on the forefront of taking down the commission in the 80s. What he wanted to do is in the early 90s, he wanted to rid Mafia control from not only the Fulton Fish Market, but from things like the San Gennaro Feast. If you look into the San Gennaro Feast, the Lucchese Crime Family controlled that for 100 years, right? Still may do that today. There are members of the Mafia that, literally operate in the Lily right now. Look into Lombardi's Pizza. Now, eventually, once Mr. Giuliani looks to take control of the market, at that point in the early 90s, the control of the Fulton Fish Market is in the hands of Rosario Ganji, who operated through his brother, who had a fish company on the Fulton Fish Market. Also involved was Alphonse Ali Shades Malangone, who also had a son who operated a seafood wholesaler business at the Fulton Fish Market. And we would find that Carmine Russo had a son, baby Carmine. He worked at the Fulton Fish Market. Elio Albanese, all these guys who were under people like P.D. Red, Ali Shades, all these guys had jobs, and they controlled the unions so they could give jobs to anybody. These guys were leeches, and they needed to be removed from the Fulton Fish Market. It was that simple. Eventually, the Mafia try to start fires down there. There was a fire in 1995, but ultimately Rudy Giuliani won, and he was able to wrestle control away from the Mafia. The Fulton Fish Market would close in November of 2005 for good. They would move the market and all of the seafood wholesaler operations to an area in the Bronx called Hunts Point. Now, I'll get in a little bit to the Hunts Point produce market in just a second, but think about this. The original Fulton Fish Market was opened in 1822. It operated for nearly 200 years. How much money did the Genovese crime family make? We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Everything costs more because of these scumbags. You go out and buy some halibut or some, I don't know, whatever you grab, you're paying them. The money is going to them. And what they could also do is they control everything. No cops are going down there. So you want to put a sports bet in, you want to get a loan, you want to do all that, you got to deal with them. They control everything. And I got to be honest, I know there will be someone that will see this, that maybe worked down at the Fulton Fish Market during this time. I would love to speak to you. I'd be fascinated to learn what it was like down there. And what's so interesting is when I watched this documentary, this show on YouTube, about an hour long, this guy, Roger, talks to a bunch of fish people that have been down there for 30, 40 years. They were there at the original location. They eventually went up to Hunts Point. And most of the market today is Asian, right? And you got to think of how big the market is. They supply food to restaurants from Brooklyn to Connecticut to all sorts of places, right? And they control every force of it. I'd love to speak to somebody that maybe worked down there. Very fascinated by that. And one thing we did learn, I did a video a while ago on Lefty Guns Ruggiero, who operated down in Two Bridges. He had a location at the Fulton Fish Market. So this was a vast, vast business. And it is such a long history. It's a shame that the Mafia destroyed it for what it was. Now, as I said, in 2005, it would be closed for good. And everything would be moved to the new Fulton Fish Market, which was at Hunts Point Produce Market. Now, Hunts Point essentially is a kind of a business area of the Bronx, not far from Manhattan. It's about 60 acres, and it's the largest food distribution center of its kind in the world. Now, the annual revenues at Hunts Point Market are in the neighborhood of about $2 billion. Truckers, all sorts of people going in there. It's a huge, huge, huge market on Hunts Point. And you talk to any trucker, they hate going to Hunts Point. Nobody wants to go to Hunts Point. Very dangerous place. It's, you know, the Bronx. Nobody wants to go there. So the Fulton Fish Market goes there. Now, the food distribution center at Fulton Fish Market and the produce market is the source for approximately 50% of New York's meat. More than 50 independent wholesale food businesses are located at the market and supply food to over 22 million people. Now, understand, when Little Al Diarco cooperated, he would talk about the mob's control over legitimate, normal business. And he would tell in the late 80s, the feds, that they essentially, the Lucchese crime family, ran the produce market and that it was, quote, ours. In the late 80s, they had control over about 11,000 people that worked there. Keep in mind, the Hunts Point produce market is the biggest employer in the Bronx. All the people, you know, whether it's Harlem, the Bronx, a lot of people work, 11,000 people. How do they control it? Well, the Lucchese crime family controls the union, most notably the Teamsters Local 202, IBT. The Teamsters was incredibly corrupt. It always has and always will be. Now, today, it's not as corrupt, but it was very corrupt. We all know that. Now, according to Diarco, the point man for the Lucchese crime family up at Hunts Point was a person called Joseph Giampa. Now, Joseph Giampa not only controlled the union head, a person called James Begley Jr., but he was a capo regime, and the people underneath him, see him on the bottom there next to Sal Avellino, his main person at the Hunts Point produce market was this guy, a person called Marco the Old Man Menudo. Now, Menudo was born way back in the early 30s. And yes, in this photo, he's 87 years old last year. However, Marco Menudo had been in the Bronx for years. His family owned an ice business, which, look, if you know anything about meat and produce and all this stuff, you need ice. he held control over it, and he was a made member of the Lucchese Crime Family. Wasn't out there hurting people. He was an earner. All of the people we're talking about here, Menudo, Carmine Romano, all these guys, Ganji, earners. Ali Shades, earner. They make a lot of money. There are two different types of mobsters, earners and people that hurt people. And then there are people that do both. They're very powerful. But a lot of these guys you've never heard of. Marco Menudo did very well in his life. He's approaching his 90th birthday. He's got millions of dollars. His family will never have to do nothing again. Now, what's funny is I actually featured Marco at one point. He was arrested in about 5 years ago, very old, in his 80s. He was arrested for bookmaking, I believe, or some sort of thing. But this guy made a bunch of money, too, in the gas business, Marco Menudo, in the gas tax scheme. A lot of money. Imagine talking to this guy. Very interesting. Not only did the Lucchese Crime Family control produce, but they controlled meat markets, they controlled butchers, they controlled trucking, they controlled everything. The Mafia's control over these markets is fascinating. And we look at today, we ask ourselves, who controls this stuff now? No one. There's no mob influence up at Hunts Point now. And if you watch this film, you'll learn that. There's no mob control there now. And most of the people that operate inside this market at Hunts Point, Asians, Vietnamese, there are very few Italians even left. I don't know why I'm so fascinated by like the fish market business, but I don't know. Something's interesting. I think in another life I would love to do shows about like just interesting people. Talk to people that were, I don't know, fishermen or something. I don't know. But a lot of these guys, we've never heard of, but they made a lot of money. Carmine Romano's family will never have to do much of anything. He has businesses, real estate, drive the Mercedes-Benz. You look at some of these earner people, right? You look at a guy like Perry Criscitelli, Bonanno Crime Family. Guy owns like 6-7 restaurants down in Little Italy. Lives in a 10,000 square foot home on Staten Island or Long Island. Drives a Bentley. These are earners. You want these people in your crew. Carmine Romano kicked up to somebody. And he was, a lot of the time, at different high-end Genovese people's homes. Wasn't bothered, wasn't dealt with, just earned a bunch of money. And this is where the essence of this world is fascinating to me, right? We talk about the Hoboken Joe last week. Guy made a lot of money. Most of the people that we mentioned today, no one's ever heard of. Maybe you heard of Ali Shades or, one of these people wrote Ross Ganji, but a lot of these guys are quiet. I've always been fascinated by the Fulton Fish Market. I would urge you, it's got about 2 million views. If you're interested in the fish market business, check out this documentary. It's pretty good. It came out about 10 years ago. This guy's pretty interesting. And, I don't know why I'm so fascinated by fish, but it's interesting to me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, it is Saturday. And I know some of you saw a recent video that I did about leaving the world. It's not going to be tomorrow. It's not going to be next week, but it will happen eventually. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like what we're doing, you want to support me further, hit that like button, hit the super thanks icon as well. Donate to the channel. Anything's appreciative. But we will see you all soon. We'll see you next week. I think we're going to get Louis Casman back. We'll see. Maybe a little Q&A. I'm going to try to maybe stay away from the live shows for a while. I think the essence of the channel is just doing stuff like this. So thanks for watching. Thanks for checking out this show here on a Saturday. And if you're listening to us next week, hope you enjoyed this one too. We'll see you next week here on The Sit Down.